Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It is me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and we're back this week with another fine episode of You on Joe. I hope everyone listened to last week's Jamie Sullivan interview. That was really great. Got great responses from that, and it was fun to just get back into the interview saddle. You listeners, this is the G.I. Joe podcast where I've covered, every episode of the Sunbow Show, all the DICs, all the extremes. We've also covered all the issues of the G.I. Joe Marvel Real American Hero series. So look back in the archives, find whichever episode or issue you love, and hit play on that episode. It'll be there for you. I'll sit in your ear like a nice, comfortable little G.I. Joe on your shoulder. So this week we've got a very fun episode. I sat down to talk with Darren Howlett of Whiskey Jack Toys. That's right, the company that is bringing you the Legends of the Hidden Force. They've got a new Kickstarter going for the upcoming line of villains called Chaos, which is just that. It's very villain-centric, and it's about building villain armies. And these are 3 3/4 inch, totally articulated figures, just like the original Joe line, that are very, very compatible with the existing Joe toys. And so for all your dioramas, all your play sets, all your play times, these are really, really great, cool third-party editions that will pair very nicely. They've got their own backstory. Very interesting stuff. If you're not familiar with it, if you are familiar with it, then you know it's quality product. And they look fantastic. So their Kickstarter that Darren's running, it ends on November 23rd. So as you listen to this podcast, and we're in your ears talking about it, you need to go to Kickstarter and visit it. Just, search for Whiskey Jack Toys, or, Legends of the Hidden Force, that kind of stuff. Do those searches. You'll find it on Kickstarter and give it a look. If it's something that suits your fancy, give it a backing. And if not, share it and tell your friends. Speaking of telling your friends, we need you to tell all of your friends about our wonderful sponsors, the Movies in a Meal podcast. They are, they're covering all the latest movies, all the latest genre TV shows. I did it, gang. I went and I saw Terrifier 3 in the theaters. I felt gross. I felt dirty. I've watched all the other Terrifier movies. They're gross. I watch them on, like on my phone or my tablet, kind of in the comfort. Like it just feels wrong to watch them in a room with other people. And yet there I was at the Grove out here in Los Angeles watching Terrifier in a room pretty packed with people. If you like slasher movies, they're right up your alley. It's gross. It's unrelenting. I'll say this though, like the special effects, the real practical effects, they're really well done. Like it's very visceral. There's no hope in those films. There's nothing redeeming about those movies. But I was like, you know what? Let's do this. Let's see what this is all about. Experiencing a Terrifier film in the company of other people. I don't think I'll be doing that again. However, if you want to hear what the our friends over at Movies in a Meal podcast are listening to and what movies they're sharing with other people, I hope they don't talk about Terrifier 3 because it's just a revolting experience. Not that it's a terribly made movie. It's just hard. Those movies are hard to watch. So throwing that out there. However, I will caveat this with, I'm sure they're talking about the Penguin. Penguin is probably one of the best TV shows going on right now. You all need to check that out. So please give our sponsors, the Movies in a Meal podcast, give them a look. You're going to be happy you did. While you're on there subscribing to their podcast, you can say hi to me at Joe and Joe Pod, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com, just like our guest today, Darren Howlett, did. And we got in touch and we got him on the show. You too can be on the show, or you can just say hello and we can become new friends. I'm always open for that. Happy Halloween, everyone. If you've got any G.I. Joe-centric costumes, share those on Instagram, share them on Twitter. I'll retweet it. We'll do all that good stuff. And man, I just appreciate you guys. If you want to help support the show, you can go to patreon.com/JoeOnJoePod and do so that way. Or you can just go to the Patreon and check out some of the episodes that aren't normally available on the feed. All kinds of stuff going on. But today we are talking about the Legends of the Hidden Force. Really great conversation with Darren up in British Columbia. So let's jump on in, tune in, and lend me your ears for some talk about Chaos, the new line of villainous 3 3/4 inch, bad dudes. So you're a fan. You're into GI Joe. You're into collecting toys. At what point in that process do you go, I want to do this. I want to make my own.
uh, I, in all honesty, the genesis of it. Okay, I've never really thought about this, but the very beginning, I had this friend. His name is Scott McDonald, and he was my best friend's other best friend, and we were probably 8 or 9 years old, and
So that's like you like Summer George.
I absolutely loved GI Joe, and I went to his house, and he and his brother had taken apart all their Joes and created their own, and that was mind blowing to me. Not necessarily the construction swap, but they'd made new characters, and I was like, "You can do that? Like, you can make your own characters. You can make your own." I was like, "I want to do that."
Yeah.
Like, I want to do that. And I didn't necessarily start swapping all my figures, but I started modifying them enough so that I would make new characters. And by the time I was probably about 11 or 12, I was like, that would be the coolest job ever, is to make toys of my own, make my own action figures. And I sort of parked that. And then in my late 20s, I owned a nightclub at that time, and my ex-wife and my mother were trying to talk me into settling down. And not that I was a wild partier by any means. I was pretty tame and timid for a nightclub owner.
You owned a nightclub though.
Yeah. And they were like, well, what are you going to do next? And I said, I would only sell this if I was going to go into toy making. And they both laughed, and they both ridiculed me for quite a while. Bear in mind, this is my wife and my mom.
Well, yeah, I think that's, you also prefaced it with X. So we're starting to learn why.
Yeah, exactly. And so a few years passed, and unfortunately my mom passed away, and also my ex-wife and I had broken up, and I realized, it just dawned on me one morning. I was like, there's no one in my life telling me I can't do this now.
It's amazing.
So why not? And so that was probably late 2013, and I started pursuing how to do it. Or yeah, about that.
That's,
I mean,
if I backpedal a little, so great. Yeah. Oh no, we're gonna backpedal. We're gonna backpedal.
Sure. Yeah. Right. No, I was gonna say, if we backpedal a tiny bit, Marauder John and I were friends, and through multiple other friends, we were friends of friends, and a couple of years before. So when I still owned the nightclub, I was still married. He was trying to start up a toy line before the Marauder weapons. And he was looking for somebody to invest in it, and I did. And unfortunately, that line ended up never coming to fruition. But that was it. I had the bug. Yeah. I was like, okay, I got to do this. This is what makes me happy. So
that's, those moments in your life are few and far between, and they don't always come for everyone. A lot, or if they're there, the people don't recognize them. So whatever it is, whatever dream you are chasing, to see that and to go after that is very admirable in my world. Well, I really admire that.
I feel lucky. Yeah. I feel lucky to have recognized what it was that makes me happy and be able to pursue it. I've stumbled all the way. I've never made the perfect step, but even through the stumbling, I'm happy. My life my life has enjoyment in it, so long as I'm getting to do that creative side of what I want to do.
So you've previously put together Kickstarter projects for Legends of the Hidden Force.
That's right.
And we've got Eagle Force and Impact.
Yeah.
Was Legends your first one, or what was the first one? That was it?
Yeah, Legends. Yeah. So far it's Legends of the Hidden Force and Chaos, and then the other two are coming up pretty quick after.
Oh, okay, great. And Chaos, by the way, listeners, is Darren's Kickstarter that is focused on villains. We're going to have you tell us more about those. It ends November 23rd, 2024. So if you're hearing this, looks like you got about a month to back it. Get in there early, get those, get the levels up, get momentum put behind it. So Darren, tell us about Chaos. It's just villains. Are they in the, like, storyline wise? Are they in the Legends of Hidden Force world, or are they in their own thing?
Sort of. I mean, I don't want to give away everything, but I would say for the
Tease
time
us,
being,
tease us,
every
baby.
yeah, everything in Legends of the Hidden Force is its own thing. It exists in its own place. Uh, Whereas Chaos, you're going to find that has some ties to other toy lines we do down the road, but Chaos is also sort of set up so that other it can interact well with other toy lines or other brands. It's set up to be very collaborative with people I have no idea who, but if it becomes a comic, there's baked right in. There's ways and means of crossing over with other comics, or
Sure.
yeah. So, but Chaos is I've been describing it as at first I was just calling it like supervillains Game of Thrones, but it's kind of like a Legion of Doom meets Game of Thrones, where you have all these small groups and one guy who's brilliant and endlessly wealthy, Killjoy. He's tired of being foiled by his nemesis, and he said, he has the brilliant idea that why doesn't he take all these other people that he's seeing that are constantly being foiled? They form a team and take out each other's nemesis, and it works really well. And then he starts reaching out to small groups and sort of integrating them into chaos. And over time, he has 12, 13, 14 groups, and then they all start infighting. So we're sort of seeing that at the stage where the toy line sort of launches at the point where that's starting to happen. These groups have just all joined, and there's a lot of tension.
That's what happens. You put a couple villains in a room, man, infighting. It's
Exactly,
it's
exactly.
honestly, Lucas was onto something when he said there's only two Sith at a time.
Yeah,
Because you get three in the room and there's trouble.
yeah,
It
absolutely, and
really
that's how I
is.
see it. That's the whole Game of Thrones aspect.
Yeah.
Is each one of them is plotting to take out the other. So each one wants the whole the whole kit and caboodle,
And
and
chaos
so
is an
it goes.
acronym. Chaos is an acronym, right? So what
Yeah,
C period H period. So what does it all
yeah,
stand for?
yeah. It's criminal hordes oppose criminal hordes assembled to overthrow the system. There's the only reason I stumbled there is I've never said this to anybody else. This isn't a scoop, but kind of is there's actually a second acronym, but for the purpose of the first year, it's
Sure.
criminal hordes assembled to overthrow the system.
Hey, if Shield can change their acronym, Chaos
Right?
can
Exactly.
absolutely change their acronym.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So this seems like a long history of love of articulation and 3 3/4 action figures for you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
going way back
Yeah.
when you first saw those GI Joes,
Yeah.
roughly what year? What year? Like what? When were you born?
What year?
Yeah.
So I saw them in 1982. I saw them in the first year. I
Okay.
remember. I remember precisely where I was. I was in a mall in Victoria, which means nothing to you guys, but it
Oh,
and
we represent Canada. We represent
so
British Columbia down
so
there.
we had a toy chain back then called Toys and Wheels, and it was in every mall all across Western Canada. And right out front of Toys and Wheels, they had this display for GI Joe figures, and I literally dropped to my knees and was pleading with my mom and was like, "Oh my god, these things are the most amazing things. These are like,"
Yeah.
and she's like, "Why do they wear toys now?" And I was like, "No, no, you don't see what I see. Like these things are amazing." Anyways, it took many more trips and cajoling with my mom before I ended up getting some, but I was in love with them at first sight.
That's
I knew
great.
right away that I wanted them.
Do you
Yeah.
remember any which like were there a specific figure or was there a specific like do you remember any of like you fell in love with Snow Job or was it
Yeah.
Breaker
Oh, that's
or
funny you
like
mention them. So yeah, so I desperately when I saw them all, yeah, my favorite was probably Breaker and possibly Flash.
Mhm.
Those were the two I just was like, these guys are awesome.
Yeah,
And sorry. And then let me just put that in a drawer so it doesn't bother us.
that's okay.
Um, yeah, so Flash and Breaker, I think, and then but I still wasn't allowed to buy them. And then my parents' friends stayed over one night and they used my bed, and I had to sleep on the couch. And then when they left, because my mom they were verboten, they were forbidden, they were
Mm.
not allowed in our house. And Dave, my dad's best friend that had stayed, he whispered as they were leaving, he's like, "Hey, go look under your pillow." I'm like, "What?" So I ran upstairs, looked under my pillow, and there was Zap, and I was just like, "Oh my god!" And so my mom's conceded, and she said, "You're allowed, you can receive figures, but I'm not buying you any, and you're not buying."
So Dave, Dave is
Yeah.
the candy man here.
Oh yeah, he's awesome. Yeah,
Dave's your your
yeah,
origin drug dealer here.
yeah, yeah. There it is. And then so I convinced my
Oh,
grandmother
that's
to take me
great.
to the store to buy one, and she said okay. And we went down there, and I went to buy Flash and Breaker, and I got there, and there was Airborne and Snow Job,
Oh,
and I'd never seen. I was like, what the and so I guess I just, that was at the time of the refresh for the next wave,
yeah,
and so I got those two,
that's
and
great.
and that was it. That was the beginning of my Joe collection.
And what two great figures to see where previously you were exposed to, pretty, even though obviously Flash has got that
Yeah,
the great red, baseball jersey thing
yeah,
going on. But it's everyone's green and you're in your head,
yeah,
you're thinking military green, green, then you
yeah,
show up and you see Snow White and
yeah,
then Airborne's outfit, which is an all-time design.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
this all-time great looking
Absolutely,
figure. And
he's
that,
still
that
one of my
must have
favorite
blown your
figures
mind.
ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he's still one of my favorite figures of all time. Yeah, I love that guy.
So great, so great. So
Yeah,
what did your end up your what how big did your collection get? Like what
big,
big?
big. So I got to, it was probably about, I want to say 87, 88, and the pressures of high school, junior high school.
Sure.
I think I was coming out of junior high, going into high school, and everybody, that all my friends were like, "Dude, you need to get over your GI Joe." And so I sold it to some random guy in the news. I listed it in the newspaper, and I sold my collection. And at the time, I had a couple of hundred figures and a couple, maybe 100 vehicles. But it turns out that that guy that had just moved to town and bought the collection for his kids, he was my principal. A month later, I met him as my principal.
Oh wow.
And so, yeah, so he had my toy collection. And I didn't start an adult one until 97. And was there on the first days of eBay, the first days of the internet, really,
Hmm.
and realized I could buy the collection I used to have off the internet,
It's great.
and I did, and then that's when I had the massive collection,
Yeah.
like
Were you able to?
5,000 figures.
Oh well, so you must have put together a pretty complete.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you still have those, or have you have
No,
you trimmed
no,
down?
those in the divorce, how all the assets got sold. So
Oh,
yeah,
oh.
Mhm.
Even under the polite rules of Canadian law, they still took your
Yeah,
GI Joes.
yeah, no, yeah, they had to go.
Oh.
Um,
So now have
yeah,
you gone back and put them together for a second time?
I've slowly, like, I desperately would love to have the collection I used to have. I really would. I
Yeah.
mean, just enamored with action figures, but I just reasonably don't have the room or display
So,
space. So,
but also
so
once you start creating, and
yeah,
once your brain, once that collector brain shifts to the collector creator brain, I think there is something that happens where you go, I
oh
don't
yeah,
necessarily need to gather more thoughts and more of
yeah,
other people's concepts. I can start taking that energy, and
yeah.
whatever resources, money,
No,
space,
absolutely.
and put it on my own thing.
Yeah, I've tried to explain that to so many of my friends. Some of my friends, some of my closest friends, have some of the biggest collections in the world, literally. And it's not that we have a disconnect, but I'll say that we'll be at a show, we'll be at whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to buy anything. I get more enjoyment out of making things. I still pick up a figure every month or two.
Hmm.
Actually, it's probably been 3 months since I bought a figure, but I still love to actively collect. I'm just selective now,
Yeah,
but I would much rather spend any, you know, little bit of cash that I have on getting my next figure made, or refining that next figure, or getting somebody to do up some new accessories, or like, that's where I get my enjoyment in the hobby. It's almost like I'm collecting pieces to put together the perfect collection that I wish I had, or
sure.
that I would love to have. So
Yeah, that
yeah,
makes that makes a lot of sense. As someone who has been a lifelong comic book collector, and I have a sizable comic collection, I
nice.
don't believe you can tell a collector that you. I mean, you could say it to them, but I don't think you can tell them how to feel about their own collection.
Yeah,
I think that all of us need to come to whatever collecting choices we make, whether it is to trim down or keep it. it has to be something that you find on your own journey, and everyone's journey is individual, and
Yeah.
they're not all going to end at the same place. One of the things I most resented as my comics were getting big were people saying that to me, of like, telling me things like that, like
Yeah.
you're gonna love this more if you did this, or if you pared on that you can appreciate it more because you have less to worry about. And even now, even I'm actually at a phase where I'm starting to pare down my collection, emotionally getting
Yeah.
there. And I always resented it because that's
Yeah.
it is me, and I am
Yeah.
it, and it's
Yeah.
part of who I am and how I express myself. And however I feel about that, I'm gonna have to come to that realization on my own for my own reasons. You can't
Right.
tell collectors how to do, how to be that way.
Yeah.
So I get it where you would say that and your friends won't get it,
Yeah.
because they're on their own journey, and their
Yeah.
journey is just as
Absolutely.
valid as yours. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand where they're at, but because I was there too, but
Yeah.
I veered left, and yeah. But yeah, I love comics too. I would love to be able to. That's the goal for me, is not just to be able to continue to put out action figures, but to support them with comics. So I
Totally. Now,
we'll see.
one of your lines is Eagle Force.
Mhm.
If I'm remembering this correctly,
Yeah.
and listeners of this show know that I get details wrong, but I speak from the heart.
Okay.
Eagle Force, wasn't that the die-cast metal,
Yeah.
barely articulated? They were a little
Yeah.
bit smaller, maybe like
Yeah.
3 inches tall.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah. I just started my GI Joe collection, and I absolutely loved them, but I didn't have any vehicles or play sets or anything. And I went down, and we had this one in our local mall. We had this one toy store called Ideal Toys, and I went down there to with cash. I don't know if it was birthday money. I went
You
down
had a
there.
couple
Didn't know.
you had a couple loonies in your
Yeah,
pocket.
yeah. Well, it predate the loony, but
Oh,
yeah. So then we yeah, so I remember my mom was like, "Yeah, sure, I'm not going to stop you. You buy what you want." And I almost bought the Eagle Force Mountain, the Eagle Mountain.
mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a collection at the time, but I was like, I can get Eagle Mountain and a handful of figures, or I can get the GI Joe headquarters. I can do one or the other, and it was a pivotal time for me. I was like, no, I'm GI Joe.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm the GI Joe guy. But there's that lingering sort of interest right there that solidified that I realized, like, I'm actually considering this. I might actually want to buy these. And ever since then, I always wanted to revisit them. I thought that there were some great things there that needed to be explored or to be had fun with.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've loved Eagle Force for ever since then. And I remember talking to Bill. I want to say it was 2017 or 2018.
Bill who?
Bill, sorry, that is Bill Murphy. He is the owner of Eagle Force.
Oh, cool.
He bought Eagle Force from, I want to say it was, I'm assuming he bought it off Marty Abrams from Mego.
Okay.
I know that he
Oh
legally
yeah,
owned.
yeah. That was Migos. That was Migos
Yeah,
line, because
yeah,
weren't they the same size as the like General Zod that Mego did? Isn't that like
yeah.
the same? Remember those, like they called them? I think it was just generic superheroes.
Oh
There
yeah,
was
yeah,
like a
yeah,
small
yeah,
Superman and a General Zod
yeah.
figure.
I think they were close to size. I don't know if they were the exact same. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, very okay. Yeah, that all makes
yeah.
sense.
So I was talking to Bill, and at the time, like I said, I used to have a different toy company, and we got talking, and it wasn't really going to fit. And I was like, I'd love to do something with you with Eagle Force one day. And he was like, yeah, maybe. And so I was like, ooh, holding on to that glimmer of hope. And over time, with another friend that I was working with at that other toy venture, I said, "Look, why don't we develop a pitch and see what Bill thinks? Maybe he'll give us a license or whatever." And so we did, and unfortunately, it was poor timing because Bill had just promised another friend that they could have the Eagle Force license for a period of time,
Mm.
and that was fine. But I expressed to Bill I was super interested, and if it ever came up again, please to consider me. And yeah, and then he and I actually, our friendship strengthened over the next few years, and we had a couple of sort of talks about long term and what we both saw for long term, and when the license came up again, I just approached him and I was like, "Hey, it's not I don't have a new pitch for you. It's the exact same pitch from before. Like, can we put this into play now?" And he was like, "For sure, let's do it. Like, go for it." So that's where we're at.
Oh, it's great.
Bill
So
is
that Kickstarter hasn't that one hasn't kicked off yet.
That's right. And that actually won't go to Kickstarter.
Oh,
That
okay.
Bill moved into recently into some sort of a, I don't know the actual definition of it, but he is with Big Bad Toy Store. He's
Oh, okay.
part of the management crew, and so that
Shout
one's
out.
yeah, that one's going to go through Big Bad Toy Store. They're developing a new, essentially a crowdfunding platform for internally,
Oh,
and
cool.
Eagle Force is going to be part of that.
That's great.
Yeah,
I'm on the side of I love the crowdfunding projects. They
yeah,
yes, they tend to be it's just broad stroking it. They tend to be
yeah,
a little more expensive,
yeah,
but what it does is it gives people like you and me these deep cut
yeah,
figures or toys or or play sets or vehicles that like you'd never get sitting
yeah,
on a Target shelf. You're
yeah,
never going to see that stuff for 15.99. So here's a
yeah.
Kickstarter that you can get for $30, and you're like, yeah,
That's right.
okay, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. It's a perfect place for some niche product that would normally otherwise not get made.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, and I don't know how much life it has in it. I do believe that, there's at least a couple more years of just the general crowdfunding that we see right now. But I also feel like anything else, it's going to mutate or change or
Yeah.
grow in some other way to be a little more palatable because it just will. I mean, people are starting to get a little leery and weary of crowdfunding, and unless there's a new way of presenting it or a mutation, a growth of it, it'll just end up falling to the wayside.
Interesting. What do you think? What things do you think people are getting tired of these days?
I don't know. I think that people just, and I don't have a solution. I'm not like secretly sitting on the magical
Oh,
answer,
sure.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that generally speaking, people don't like the wait time. Um,
That's true.
they like to get excited about a product, but then they want to see that product soon.
Yep.
And the realization is, or the reality of it all is, toys take about from from concept, not even from concept, from ready to go to actually being produced. It's well over a year,
Yeah.
and we have to somehow shorten that gap. Uh, and then I think crowdfunding will have found its niche, or it'll be
Hmm.
strengthened. It'll be a lot easier to swallow if we can narrow that gap to like 6 months.
That makes a lot of sense. I know for comic books, I've seen a lot of people recently basically give the advice of, in comic books, obviously are a
Mm,
much smaller
mm,
price point for the creator to actually
right.
spend the money first. But really, some successful Kickstarters have made the advice of pull the money out of your own pocket if possible.
Yeah.
Get the product done, then do
Yeah.
the Kickstarter and fulfill,
Yeah.
like say within a month of the Kickstarter ending, because
Yeah.
that's when people's brains are on it. That's when they're thinking about it. They're going to feel more fulfilled because they're going to even literally remember that they backed it.
Yeah.
And then you get that money, and then that pays you back, but also funds the next one.
That's
And
right.
it's like starting a lawnmower.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that Big Bad can
Mm,
help alleviate. Like if they can be the lawnmower
yeah.
that
Well, my
that certain Kickstarter, that certain creators kind of join in
yeah.
on, that could help. That might be able to help the process.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest gap there in that I've experienced, because like I said, this Legends of the Hidden Force isn't our first toy line. It's just the first one that everybody knows about.
Mm-hmm.
But my experience is if you can get past the tooling phase and which is arguably half of the expense,
Yeah.
a production run of a new figure, half of the money goes into tooling, half the money goes into the plastic and paint. Um, but if we, what we tried to do, but we couldn't, we just didn't have the money. And hopefully in the third line or fourth line, that'll be it. But the idea was that we would come into it with the tooling made. We already have the tooling made. We're
Mm-hmm.
just trying to get the production run financed.
Sure.
At that point, we would be looking at just a few months
What
from.
is the lead time on tooling?
So tooling, it does. The thing is there's nobody in China that will give you a set time frame, but uh, from my experience, tooling takes anywhere from it depends on what you're working with, but like if you're working with an actual sculpted model versus some 3D models versus whatever. But um, yeah, it takes like anywhere from back in the previous toy company, it would only take 3 months, and nowadays it takes 6 to 8 months.
Really?
And I wasn't prepared for that, and but everybody else was looking at me like, yeah, that's natural, that's the standard. I'm like, well, oh, maybe I just had a lucky before,
Wow.
but
Now, do you
yeah,
think that may have changed because of demand, or that?
maybe. Yeah, I think, well, I definitely know that there were, so I lost that business during COVID. Many businesses were lost during COVID, especially in China, because China had that massive lockdown before we ever did. And they, that's when my factory went belly up. Like they just locked the doors. It was done. And then they never came back. And there was many like that. There were quite a few. So I think that, yeah, and I don't necessarily know if there's a new surge in demand or it's just there's less players on the field and there's still the same demand. So now, you know, if there was 100 factories before and there's only 45 now, they're still facilitating all the needs of all of us, plus the other new companies that pop up.
Interesting. Yeah. Now,
Yeah,
this may totally be a super naive question.
sure, I'm okay with that.
What about that's all I got in the show. What about US based
Yeah,
toolers and not coming from like a my American perspective,
yeah,
but
no,
more of
I've
like
looked
a
at it.
someone you can work with closer and maybe they can get it done a little faster. Is it?
Yeah, I've definitely looked at it, and yeah, it's still too expensive.
Yeah.
But I'll put it this way: if my company ever became big enough where I don't know, I don't want to sound like I'm flexing because I'm not. I don't want to sound like whatever, but right now, every deal I do, every whatever, we're talking in the tens, 20s, 30s, 40s of thousands of dollars at the whatever. If ever it moves to those deals are 100, on that scale, I think that that's when it might work here, like in North America.
I see.
I just don't think that these micro production runs, the amount of labor and the cost of labor in the U.S. and the cost of the property and the cost of whatever. But I absolutely, if I see even a middling of success, my everybody that works for me knows that my goal is to have our own injection molding machines, our own paint department, our own. We already have our own design and engineering, so I would love to just actually have our own central point in North America and produce here, and not to leave China out because of any other, like there's no reason. I'm not disappointed
Sure.
or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just there's so many variables and we're at their mercy for those variables. They can just say, yeah, it's going to be another 6 months, and I just have to eat that. I just have to
Right.
accept that. Whereas if I had my own facility that was with central distribution to all over the North America, um, yeah. And this is a conversation I've had with many people over many years,
Mm-hmm.
and you know there's even talk of some sort of a consortium of a group of companies coming together and possibly doing that. But we're still a few years out from that. None of us have the capital to each be able to pony up $100,000 each and say, let's get this thing started. So but it's definitely in discussion.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. What I've enjoyed about doing this show is learning all these little smaller aspects to making those things that we all love.
Mm.
You know, whether it's
It would be
whether it's the
amazing.
marketing side of it, but the production side,
Yeah.
it's
It honestly would be amazing because the turnaround right now, like I said, for an action figure when you're dealing with factories in China is, 15, 18 months. And by all reason, you could here, you could have an idea and then be physically holding the product that's about to go to retail 3 months later
yeah.
if it was all in-house.
Right. And
So,
3D
yeah.
printing, has that helped at all? It doesn't sound. I mean, is that at all
Um,
involved in the process that can maybe short circuit some steps?
it it maybe for others,
Mm-hmm.
I would assume for others, but for me, really, I don't know. it's good for accuracy. I would say that
Hmm.
there's no things being left to question. You literally can just print and refine and perfect and send a physical sample and say this instead of did the file go through all right?
Oh,
You
that's
know,
cool.
like
Yeah.
did you know what I mean? So there's that. That's definitely helped, but otherwise, not really. I mean, and also it's fun to be able to sit. Like we printed off a whole bunch of samples of our figures and handed them to our friends that so graciously painted them for us.
Hmm.
And that's that. There's that.
No,
That's
that's
great
cool.
to be
Yeah,
able
that's
to
your own
hold the
private.
samples in
You have your
hand.
own private collection of extra special
Yeah,
figures. Yeah,
yeah,
that's pretty wild.
yeah.
Um,
And it definitely helped us being able to have physical things that people could touch at all the shows that we did. Where instead of it just being either a digital or conceptual, people were like, "Oh, yeah, this figure is great."
yeah. Are your finished figures they the more traditional? I don't know the term for the plastic, but like more traditional hard plastic, three and three
Yeah,
quarters, or the newer ones
yeah.
that we've seen come out of Hasbro where they're a little softer, more malleable.
No, no, they're not the softer malleable. They're definitely like traditional. I think the only thing that we had to do was more like the 2000, like the 99, 2000, 2001
Hmm.
era, where they had that slightly softer, more malleable forearm and maybe the head.
Yeah,
And we had to do that because we added articulation to the arms and we added articulation to the head. So they have a little bit more PVC in there than normal,
cool.
and but that also helps them retain paint. But otherwise, the wrists, because we added like swivel wrists
Hmm.
that go around. If we hadn't done that, there'd be no catch, and the hand would just constantly fall out if it was just straight hard plastics.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, so by just adjusting the plastic mix a bit, yeah, there's some catch there.
That's great. Now, is that the kind of trial and error that you figure out, or do your partners over in China help you with that?
No, but apparently they could have. I found out after. They have a whole engineering department that's eager to go, and it was like, oh, well, we spent 8 months figuring this out. So yeah, yeah,
How does it do they have pretty good translations?
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
translators
It's.
working
I
for
mean,
them?
there's always going to be like, yeah, there's one or two people that sort of speak for the company that have like impeccable English.
Hmm.
That's just sort of the way they operate.
Yeah,
So,
it must
but as
be a
far as
necessity. Yeah.
as far as translating ideas, no. um, we sent very, very, very clear ideas, not ideas, written on paper, every single paint code, every single everything in super clearly for every figure. And then they did all the mock-ups, and every one of them had at least three, four, five things that were totally wrong. And then yeah, so then we had to go through the process, or I didn't, thankfully. One of my partners, Chad, he went through the process of walking them through each figure one a day
Yeah.
and saying, this is what's wrong, this is what you need to adjust, this is how it needs to be adjusted. And as of today, I think there's only three more figures, but they've already started to go to paint for the others. So, Legends of the Hidden Force is only a few months out.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah,
That's really
finally,
exciting.
yeah, the figures were made. And that's the other thing. There's a huge disconnect. They made the figures like 3 or 4 months ago, and we're just like thinking that the painted figures are going to show up soon. And they're like, okay, we're starting just a week or two ago. They're like, we're gonna ready to paint now. We're like, what? What? You haven't even
Oh
started
no.
painting? And then that's when they said, just checking. These are the way you want them painted. We're like, no, no, God, no, no. Every one of those is wrong. So
Oh well, glad
yeah,
they asked. Yeah. Now,
yeah,
how many
yeah.
people are on the Whiskey Jack team?
It's essentially four people. So Whiskey Jack is my company, but everything I do is collaborative. So the first one was Hidden Force was with Matt and Chad. They're brothers that are pretty well known throughout the last 25 years of the GI Joe community.
Shout out Matt
Um,
and Chad.
yeah, Matt and Chad, the Wonder Twins. They they're known as being sort of expert customizers and
Cool.
yeah, some of the first sort of excellent customizers. And then Whiskey Jack ended up being just me. That was just timing. I always knew I was going to do it by myself. It was supposed to be way down the road, but it worked out better if it was bumped up ahead.
Mhm.
And then Impact is myself and Alman Ellis. And so those four of us are essentially, we work on so we all work on each other's stuff all the time. We're always developing things together. But there's clear lines of who owns which IP, but we share the library of molds. And so this mold library that we're creating, there just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's for all of us to use.
That's smart. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
And then
who's the art?
yeah.
Are you the artist? Like who do you do? Where do you go for art?
What part of art? We
Well, both the packaging and also the
Sure.
like creatively putting the figures together.
Sure.
Like you're looking
Yeah.
at it, you're like, I want them in a flak jacket with a ski mask, and who do
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go to illustrate that?
Yeah, so in that regard, Matt does all of that. So I go to Matt and I say, "This is what this guy looks like." He's all black and he has an orange skeleton motif or printed tampo, and he's going to have a jack-o'-lantern head, but he's also going to swap out for this head. And
I saw that guy. The guy looks cool.
and if we have parts, I'm thinking these parts and those parts that already exist, or I'll have already had somebody digitally sculpt the head for him and say, this is the head, I got this head from Stefan, or I got this head from so and so, this is the head we're going to use for this guy. So, and then Matt puts that all together. As far as how I say to Stefan, the guy designing the parts, and I'm saying him, I don't actually work with him that much anymore, but we did work a lot together in the beginning. And for Stefan, I would get he needs a ton of visual references. So I literally just scour the internet and I'm like, I would like the face to look something like this, but I want more of it like this or more like that. And, I want it to be the size of this or this kind of texture and whatever. And yeah, I end up sending him like just massive image files for each figure. And then he sculpts the parts and then I can show them to Matt and Matt can start painting them.
Cool. How many up sizes do they sculpt? Like 1 up, 2 up?
Yeah, I don't do any more traditional sculpting. We do solely digital.
It's all
sculpt.
digital. Okay.
Yeah, solely digital. There's just so much so that
That makes
you
sense.
know,
It's 2024. Jesus.
yeah, and
Do you carve them out of wood?
yeah,
What kind of
The,
knife do you use to whittle?
the great part about that is that anybody can work on it. So, like for instance, just the other day, I had this one piece that had been sculpted by Stefan. I had to remember who originally did it, and it's been sitting as a file for 3 years, just sitting there. And even though I need that file as it is, I also needed a different version of it. And I asked Rodney, I just like, hey, that remember that sculpt? Can you adjust it this way and this way? Because we're going to need it that adjusted that way, and he can. Whereas if it was a traditional 3D sculpt or sorry, a traditional sculpt, and that had already gone off to the factory, that'd be a whole, like, there's no turning on a dime and coming up with an idea on the fly and being able to change it. But with 3D sculpting, anything can change at any moment that you want it to. So
that's really great. That's really, really cool. This is all very fascinating. Now, this isn't the only thing you do, though, Darren.
Mm-hmm.
You own and operate a fine dining, farm to table style restaurant out of British Columbia called Local at the Old House.
Yeah, Locals at the Old House. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I have a couple of partners, but that we all own it. But yeah, I'm the guy that runs it.
Well, we definitely got some Canadian listeners. Jordan from Nighttime Pod for sure.
Nice.
And how long you been open in British in BC, in the old BC?
We bought the restaurant. We're about a month out from 2 years.
Great.
Maybe a month and a bit. Yeah. So, yeah, and before that, I've had a catering company for the last 10 years, and then I had food trucks.
So it sounds like to me like hospitality is kind of in your blood.
Yeah. I grew up in hospitality, and it's what I always do for the day job.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in the last 10 years, the night job has been toys.
Well, that translates into, in my brain, that translates into wanting to put together a toy line that makes your customers happy.
Yeah.
That really meets their needs and their
Absolutely.
the things they're looking for. Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally believe in being of service to your audience,
Hmm.
whether it's in the restaurant or the toy line. Like, as I said, I've said it, I think I posted on His Tank a couple days ago, and I posted it on my own, on the Kickstarter blog and everything. Just like, things are at a stage right now where everything is like 95% dialed in. So if you have a concern or an interest, or you want to see something adjusted, let me know,
Yeah.
and if we can still look at revising that. And actually, somebody that's been really championing us, I want to say his name is the Dark One.
Okay.
He's been just a fantastic, shout out to him if he's watching.
Shout
He's
out
been
Dark One.
he's been really rallying a lot of people together to sort of back this. Um, but he made a comment. He was like, the waist piece on four of the figures you've shown just doesn't fit. And honestly, we made them in a certain order and waited for certain sculpts to come in, and 3D sculpts to come in, and those were just oversights. And I realized, yeah, those weren't their final waist. They were never meant to be.
Mm,
And until he pointed it out, I didn't realize that we hadn't revised those. So we went back in and revised those. But that's what I'm saying is,
great.
anybody can comment, and it affects change. I'm here trying to provide figures that you want to buy. So, like, help me make them more palatable for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah.
yeah,
More eyes on a project always helps.
yeah, yeah.
So the Chaos Kickstarter, everyone, go to Kickstarter. What's the best search term for it? Is it for Whiskey Jack or is it Chaos?
Whiskey
Or?
Jack.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Whiskey Jack / Chaos -1. Nobody's gonna know that.
Search for Whiskey Jack.
Just search for Whiskey Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And Chaos spelled C period, H period, A period, O period, S period.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
give them a look and give Darren some backing with
he's
by November 23rd it all ends. How many
yeah.
figures in the Chaos line?
Uh, Eventually hundreds.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
for the
yeah,
Kickstarter.
for the Kickstarter, there's four that gets us funded. Four to unlock. Actually, there's six. There's four singular characters and two army builders. And if we can get those funded, then we're off and running. And I think afterwards, then there's 22.
Cool. Well, who's your
Yeah.
favorite? If you had to pick one of your favorite children, who's your favorite of the new Chaos figures?
I love them
Or
all.
which one do you want to promote the most?
I don't know. I don't know. I love Killjoy. I love Halloween. They're both some of my favorite characters I've ever created. Um, I Who else? Oof. I don't know.
And Halloween's the one with the pumpkin face, I imagine.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Killjoy. Describe Killjoy for our listeners.
Yeah, Dr. Killjoy is the guy that created the whole thing. He's the one that pulls it all together. So he's the one if you go to the first set of four or whatever, he's the one with the lab coat and the lab gloves. And
Why does he hate Joy?
he he doesn't. He was unfortunately named. He
He's
no,
actually a good guy to sit down and have a beer with. Yeah.
yeah, he's just unfathomably wealthy, and it leaves him somewhat detached from reality.
Oh wow,
And
what an
yeah,
idea!
yeah,
What?
right.
You're boy,
And
this is
and
just fiction now.
yeah, and so he goes from he just doesn't like that there's restrictions placed on him by society, and keeps working outside of those, and it keeps getting him in trouble. And he's like, well, let's just eliminate the trouble.
That's
So
awesome. That's
yeah,
awesome. So, listeners, if you're looking for some new villains for your 3 3/4 dioramas, 3 3/4 play motion videos, whatever it is you're looking for, if you need some new bad guys to juice that action up, we need you to check out the Chaos Kickstarter. So please, please, please go take a look at
yeah,
it. And even if it's maybe it's not my cup of tea, but you think it's really great, which I know you will, share it. Share the word. That's the best thing you can do with all this stuff is just share it, because sometimes it may not suit you, but it's going to suit somebody, and you're doing the community and the Joe fans a great service by getting the word out.
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. Not that you asked, but you just put images in my head from when I was younger. When I was a kid, all my friends had a Cobra Trooper,
Uh-huh.
or Cobra Trooper, Cobra Viper, Cobra Officer,
Yeah.
and those were their Cobra ranks. And I was obsessed with. I was like, no, like, there should be 30 of these guys. That, like, that's, to me, it's not heroic that my five-man GI Joe squad goes in and kills or neutralizes 3 Cobra Troopers.
Yeah.
That's not a challenge. I wanted my 5-man squad to go up against 30 guys, and that's a challenge.
So
and
you
that's
were an
where
army
the
builder.
heroism. They
You were an
overcame
army builder
God.
from way back, is what you're saying.
Oh, immediately as a kid. So to me, when I was creating this line, I was like, what would make the kid version of me happy? And it was just that. It was like, if I was playing G.I. Joe and those were the only Cobras available to me, I would wish there was more bad guys for my good guys to fight. Or if I was playing, whatever I might be playing, I always liked the idea of the bad guys had to outnumber the good guys. Otherwise, the good guys they weren't overcoming any obstacles or odds.
I like that.
They were, and so I've always been about building big bad guy armies, and that was why I wanted to do Chaos.
That's very cool. That's very cool. I know that's going to resonate with a lot of you listeners. So please check that out. Darren Howlett from British Columbia. Whiskey Jack Toys. Everyone go to whiskeyjacktoys.com. Follow them on social media. Just search for @Whiskey Jack Toys. You'll find them. I'm sure you're on all the Facebook, Twitters, and Instagrams of the world.
Yeah.
And give them some support and give them some love and check out what they're doing. It's really neat stuff, and it's carrying on the tradition and the passion that the G.I. Joe kickstarted in all of us. It ignited the original Kickstarter. It ignited that passion in all of us. So this is really cool to see stuff like this happening and growing up as we grow up and become entrepreneurs ourselves. Darren, thanks so much for being a guest on Joe and Joe today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate being invited here.
Oh, man, it's really my pleasure. And now you, Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.